And if this does turn out to be climate change, it would fall in line with a recent pattern. That pattern is one of records being shattered, from droughts to floods, worsening storms to record-breaking temperatures. Temperatures on Earth were the warmest last year since record-keeping began. That was back in 1880. And that's leading to warmer seas all over the world. I asked Rachel Cleetus what to make of all of this. She's the lead economist at the Union of Concerned Scientists.
This has led to some very destructive storms, including Hurricane Patricia, a really unprecedented storm that we saw hit Mexico. We've seen storms in the Pacific Ocean hitting small island nations. We know that this is coming because of a conflation of a strong El Nino, but it's riding on top of the steady increase in global temperature that's happening because of greenhouse gas emissions that are coming from human activities. So that those carbon emissions that are being caused by driving cars, by the power we generate from fossil fuels, those are contributing to these rising temperatures in addition to the strong El Nino phenomenon.
You know, it's interesting because it's not just that the seas are getting warmer, they're also rising. One estimate says some 100 million people live within 3 feet of sea level. How much should they be worrying, and how near in the future will they be impacted, do you think?
Well, sea level rise has been measured to be increasing. It's risen about 8 inches globally since the Industrial Revolution. But the scary part is it's rising at an accelerating rate. So the latest studies are showing by the end of the century, we could see 3 to 4 feet of sea level rise. We're already seeing the impacts in many major cities around the world, so it's worsening tidal flooding. The tides are now riding on these higher sea levels. But because many of our major cities around the world, Shanghai, Mumbai, Miami, New York, are all coastal cities, with this increasing and accelerating sea level rise, many of these cities are going to see really strong impacts in terms of flooding, to the point that many of these cities by the end of the century, large populations, millions of people will have to relocate because of the threat of the rising sea levels.
It's interesting you bring that up because there's been so much discussion about refugees because of the Syrian war and the war in Iraq, Afghanistan. But there's also this concept of climate refugees. There was a documentary out in 2010 talking about this. So give us a comparison. When you look at climate change and compare it to things like war and that economic impact, if you will.
Well, just earlier this year in January at the World Economic Forum in Davos, they released this report trying to identify the major risks to the world economy. And number one on the list was climate change. The reason being climate change affects every aspect of human life and the economic life, and it is a contributing factor to many kinds of disasters. So we know that there are geopolitical root causes for things like political refugees, for crisis, for war. But added to that, climate change is increasing the risks of these kinds of events. So for example, when you have drought situations, water scarcity, this contributes to large-scale migration in search of food. So a lot of people moving from their homes, searching for food and water, and this can lead to conflict over these scarce resources.
Let's look at the future, especially after this landmark climate agreement that took place in Paris. Are we on a better track now? It's not something where you can hit the gas pedal, suddenly hit the brakes, and things change overnight. This is going to change gradually, isn't it?
Sure. I would say the thing about the Paris Agreement was it's a very hopeful moment when you have more than 190 countries coming together saying that they're going to try to limit global temperature increase to 2 degrees C and even 1.5 degrees C if possible, that they're now on a trajectory towards a low-carbon global economy, net zero emissions by the latter half of the century. This is a huge boost to renewable energy deployment. It's a huge signal to businesses about which way the global economy is oriented. That said, the hard work begins now. How do we implement the promise of the agreement in Paris?
A lot of work still to be done. Rachel Cleetus joining us from Massachusetts. Thanks so much.